Teacup, Tempest by Wigworm. Whimpers from Maki's room woke him in the middle of the night. Maki and Hito had been sleeping in his apartment for 5 days now, and Kakashi had gotten used to midnight toddler wake-ups. But the whimpers he could hear now weren't Hito's. They were coming from Maki. Moving carefully, Kakashi made his way to Maki's door and knocked lightly enough that Maki should hear it, but that it wouldn't wake Hito. No, please. Maki's voice was low and pain-filled, and Kakashi couldn't stop himself from opening the door to look in on the young woman. "Maki-chan?" he called softly, hoping to not startle or scare her. She moaned in pain again and tossed on the bed, half fighting an invisible foe in her sleep. "No!" Kakashi quickly stepped around Hito's futon and sat on the edge of the bed. "Maki," he whispered. "Maki, it's just a dream. Wake up. It's okay." As he talked to her, he reached out and took one of her half-flailing hands. Maki woke suddenly, flinging herself away from Kakashi, blue eyes wide in terror and a scream on her lips. She managed to choke the scream off and huddled against the wall, teeth clammed into her fist, and tears pouring down her cheeks as her chest heaved in an attempt to breathe. Keeping himself very still, Kakashi waited for Maki to calm enough to realize that he wasn't following her. When the sheer terror left her eyes and she was able to look away from his dark figure to search the rest of the room for any other danger, Kakashi allowed himself to relax a bit. "Maki?" However much he would have liked to add Chan to her name like he had been for the past few days, Kakashi knew that he couldn't. "Do you know where you are?" She looked back to him wildly, her entire body shivering and jerking as though she were keeping herself from running. "No," she finally whispered, blinking frantically. Kakashi felt his heart clench, and he opened his mouth to tell her where she was when she shook her head and spoke again. "Yes? Kakashi?" She sounded confused and scared, but calming. Relief flooded through Kakashi as he responded. "Yes, I'm Kakashi. You know that you're at my apartment?" "Hey? She painfully started to untense, her limbs slowly stretching out from her huddled fetal position. I had to go somewhere because they did something to my building." As she recounted to herself how she had ended up in a man's house, Kakashi watched her with a concerned eye. Her reaction to her dream, her nightmare, and her reaction to him was extreme. He wondered with horror just what kind of long-term seduction mission she was on. Was the mark abusive? Had she been raped more than once? Had she been raped outside of her mission? Why hadn't the Corps made sure she could deal with this kind of stuff? Or maybe she needed to be like this for the mission? That was a horrible thought, and he pushed it from his mind, refusing to think that again. Konoha wasn't like that. He wondered just how much longer she could do what she was doing. She only had 3 weeks left, and wasn't that odd that her mission would end on her son's birthday? But she'd been doing this, whatever it was, for 5 years already. "How are you feeling?" Kakashi asked softly, hoping that she had calmed significantly. She blinked several times and came away from the wall slowly. "Better. She paused, giving him a grimacing smile. "I apologize for waking you up, Kakashi. I didn't mean to." "It's all right." Kakashi gently rested his hand on the covers of the bed, palm up. Maki stared at it for a long moment before cautiously resting her small hand in his. "Can you tell me what you dreamt of?" She blanched and glanced quickly to her son before looking back at him, lips pursed. "A bad experience," she muttered, curling her knees up to her chest, wrapping her free hand around her legs, hugging them close. Kakashi nodded, sympathetic with understanding, as she rested her head on her knees and stared at him. "I understand." He did. He understood that she'd had a nightmare about her assault, that she'd had a nightmare about being powerless and unable to escape. That was one of the reasons that even though her hand was in his, he hadn't closed his fingers around her hand in a trapping movement. He wanted her to know that he would never trap or control her. She slowly withdrew her hand and his, and though the action made his heart heavy, he didn't stop her. "Is Hito-chan still asleep?" she whispered softly, and Kakashi checked over his shoulder to the toddler, still sleeping peacefully. Yeah, she's fine. When he turned back to Maki, she had already crawled under the bed's covers, pulling the blanket to her chin, holding the edges of the duvet in a hold so tight that her fingers were a little white. Would you like me to go? He asked gently, not wanting to scare her more than he already had. Maki hunched her shoulders under the blanket and then nodded, shame in her eyes. Please? Of course. Kakashi leaned away, and when he stood up, he took a simultaneous step away from the bed, knowing that Maki would be more comfortable if he wasn't looming over her. If you need anything, I'll be in my room. Okay? Nodding miserably, Maki managed a short wave to him before he closed the door behind him. As he settled back into bed, knowing for a fact that he wouldn't be able to go back to sleep, but not feeling like reading or staring at the wall for a few hours before the sun dawned, Kakashi realized something important. His hand reached up and brushed across his jaw, feeling a light stubble. He hadn't been wearing his mask. Maki had seen him without his mask, or Hitayate. No wonder she hadn't recognized him for a moment. Well, that was one more thing that he didn't have to worry about then. Maki seeing his face. A clatter of dishes woke him, and Kakashi blinked sleep out of his eyes. He stared at the ceiling in shock that he'd fallen asleep after Maki's nightmare. He had been sure that he wouldn't be able to sleep after going back to bed, but the fact that he just woken up had belied that. Kakashi! Maki's voice called through the apartment. Breakfast is almost ready! Get your lazy butt out of bed! Kakashi wasn't sure whether to be relieved or not that Maki was so lively and happy sounding this morning. Coming! He called back, shifting the blankets off and setting his bare feet on the floor. He was worried that Maki was pushing the trauma away in the light of day, but she was always so alive that he wasn't sure if the nightmare had been a one-off because she'd been sleeping in his apartment for so long, or something that she regularly dealt with. As he was about to strip his t-shirt off, his bedroom door was pushed open cautiously, and Hito poked his head inside. Tashi-chan? Kakashi couldn't help but smile at Hito, no matter how conflicted he felt at the moment. Good morning, Hito-chan. He dropped the edges of his shirt back down over his stomach, thinking that the best course of action would be to just go about this morning in his t-shirt and sweatpants until his company had left for the day. Tachi-chan! Hito pushed the door the rest of the way open and toddled his way to the bed, clinging tight to Kakashi's legs. He started to babble wildly, and Kakashi's smile widened. He stood up and swung Hito into his arms, settling the boy on his hip. Hito continued to babble at him as he gave himself a discreet sniff and decided that he was okay to eat before having a shower. Maki looked up from where she was setting the small table, and Kakashi smiled at her softly, his left eye uncovered, but closed. She smiled back and went back to what she had been doing, without a single pause to study his uncovered face. So, ready for the weekend, Kakashi? She asked brightly, going to the oven and pulling it open. The smell of apples and cinnamon filled the air, and Kakashi took an appreciative sniff of the air. Most definitely. Is that apple coffee cake? He asked as he set Hito in the baby seat that Maki had clamped to the table. With a bright laugh, Maki nodded. It is. I know that you like apples, and I wanted to make something special this morning. She set the dish on the hot pad on the table, and Kakashi leaned over to look at the golden brown breakfast cake with a wide eye. Gods, that smells delicious. Their breakfast was loud and full of laughter. Kakashi volunteered to do the dishes since Maki had made the food, and so while he did that, Maki cleaned both herself and her son up, getting ready for the day. Kakashi was lounging against the counter with a steaming cup of coffee in hand when Maki emerged from the hall, Hito in tow. She was wearing a pair of bright blue khaki pants and a white tank top with brilliant orange stripes on it. Hito was dressed in orange pants and a blue shirt, as well as a small blue scarf around his neck. Hito caught sight of Kakashi and giggled, pulling free of his mother's hold and running to Kakashi. He careened into Kakashi's legs, and the Jonin crouched to steady him. Hito giggled again and pulled at the scarf at his neck, thrusting it up over his face and covering his nose. Maki laughed at the humorous look Kakashi graced her with. Ah, so you want to be like me? Kakashi asked the little boy, and Hito nodded, his blue-covered cheeks pushing his eyes closed with his wide smile. Well, I don't think I mind, and given that your mother is the one that gave you this... Kakashi stroked Hito's cheek gently, indicating the scarf even as he adjusted it, so that it matched the way his own rested on his face. I don't think she minds either. There was a particular feeling fluttering in his stomach, and he'd felt it before, but he still hadn't figured out exactly what it meant so far. Hito babbled some more before Maki stepped forward and Kakashi passed the toddler back. They shared a look, though it was more like an eye roll when Hito bawled loudly for a moment before quickly getting over being taken from his favorite silver-haired nin. When will you get back? Kakashi asked with contentment in his body language and voice, as Maki slipped on a pair of blue nondescript ninja sandals. After lunch, I think. Maki swept her ruffled bangs from her eyes. I was going to take Hito to the park, and then I thought we could have lunch with Kurenai. She likes to play with Hito. Maki smirked. I think she wants a kid of her own, actually. Anyway, so after lunch I'm going to do a little shopping. Mostly grocery to replenish her stores. Kakashi looked over his shoulder when she paused, eyeballing his kitchen. He had no doubt that he had very few food items left since he'd been feeding 3 people instead of 1 for a week. Exactly, she laughed when he redirected his gaze to her. I'll come home after that. Sounds like a good plan. Kakashi followed her to the door and waved goodbye to her as she bounced down the hall, waving back over her shoulder. The moment she had vanished down the stairs, Kakashi felt a presence beside him, and he slipped a genjutsu mask over his face before turning to see Sarutobi Asuma, one of his fellow jonin, staring at him in shock. Azuma? He asked, wondering what was wrong. Was that kid wearing your mask? Asuma asked, blinking slowly. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. He was wearing a mask, yes. Oh my god. Asuma's blinking sped up. I hadn't realized that you'd procreated already. The broader and taller man reached into his pocket and pulled out his bag of cigarettes. Though she looked pretty young, Kakashi. It took a moment for Kakashi to break through his confusion and disbelief. Hito-chan isn't mine, Asuma. And Maki-chan is... How was he supposed to explain his complicated relationship with Maki to Azuma when he didn't even know how to explain it to himself? Azuma cocked his head, lighting the cigarette. Maki-chan is... Kakashi snarled and then stopped, stepping back a bit. Azuma stared incredulously at him, cigarette hanging limply off his lips. Did you just growl at me? Sorry, Her name is Tatsumaki. Don't call her Chan. Kakashi ran a hand through his mussed hair, leaning against the doorframe. Dang it. There was a laugh, and Kakashi shot a questioning glance to the Sarutobi. Azuma smirked widely. You got it bad, don't you? I enjoy her company, Kakashi drawled out, unsure of where this was going. And if you saw her with another man? Killing intent rose, sudden and unbidden. I'd rip them apart, Kakashi snarled again, thinking of the nightmare that Maki had suffered through just last night. Thinking of how scared she had been of a man even being in the same room with her. Asuma backed up, lifting his hands defensively. Whoa, calm down, Kakashi. I wasn't about to make a move on your woman. Rational thought reinserted itself in Kakashi's mind, and he bowed his head. It's complicated, he finally told Asuma, feeling weary without a reason. It felt very strange. Asuma frowned heavily and gestured to Kakashi's door. You want to talk about it? I won't betray her confidence, Kakashi warned the bearded man, leading him into his apartment. Asuma nodded, slipping his sandals off at the door. Here. Kakashi passed the other man a cup of coffee. Maki-chan made too much for me to drink this morning. She doesn't like coffee. Taking the cup, Asuma sat down at the table and stared at the chair with a booster seat attached to it with open curiosity. So, how long have you known them? I met Hito-chan first, about 6 months ago. He stays at the daycare when Maki-chan is on her mission. Single mom, eh? Asuma murmured to himself. And you noticed Hito out of all the other babies there? Kakashi chuckled, rubbing his face. Hito managed to escape Akamichi Mito's toddler pen. You know the one with the baby poo jutsu on it? Asuma rolled his eyes. Yeah, I know that one. And the kid got out? 6 times in an hour, Kakashi muttered. I stood there and watched the little guy do it again and again after he found me the first time. So you're saying that Hito managed to escape the pen 6 times in a row. The same pen that adjusts itself so that all previous methods of escape are closed off? And then he found you? Asuma shook his head in disbelief. Were you hiding? Kakashi shrugged. I wasn't exactly standing out the first time. The copyman shrugged. It was a couple of weeks later when I was actually there when Maki-chan came to pick him up. He laughed at himself. I mistook her for Hito's sister, even though Hito called her Gachan. Asuma's gaze on him sharpened. Yeah, I know. Never underestimate children. I just couldn't believe that she was old enough to be his mother. How old is she? Asuma asked, his voice rather quiet. Oh, she's turning 17 in October. Hito will be 2 in just over 2 weeks. Why is she living here? Well, I asked her on a few pre's, and I think we've moved from pre's to actual dates, and I offhandedly offered my apartment as a place she could stay if she ever needed it. Her apartment building is being fumigated this week, and they didn't give her any notice, the idiots. Wow. Asuma broke Kakashi's words off. You really like her. I just said that. Kakashi frowned. Asuma took a close look at Kakashi, and then his lips twisted up in a stunned smile. Holy. What? Kakashi was cautiously curious about what Azuma was thinking, and Azuma waved his question off. Oh no, this? You need to figure this out on your own. Azuma laughed to himself and stood up. It's good that you like Hito-chan too, he mentioned over his shoulder, and he put his sandals back on and left Kakashi's apartment. Kakashi stared at the door in confusion before shaking himself out of it and dropping the genjutsu mask. He needed a shower, and then he could get dressed and put a real mask on. He didn't feel comfortable without the material rubbing against his face and neck.